What's happening in New Zealand? What's happening in New Zealand and the Pacific? The first place I always go to, and I'm probably the first one to download these reports because I'm curious. What are they saying? NCSC basically stated that last year there were 339 nationally significant breaches. Of those breaches, what was really interesting was there were 38% of those attacks were state-sponsored attacks. What does that mean? It's not a room of cyber hackers. It's not a floor. It's an entire building of cyber hackers. What are they trying to get? Who are they? Government funded? You serious? Well, actually, if you look into it with greater detail, the Russians are doing it for political motivation. They're trying to influence who's voted in. Let's not mention Donald Trump, but it seems like he's been backed by the Russians once again. And obviously the Chinese from an IP theft perspective. So, it's not surprising that they've stated academia and research organizations are targeted specifically for their IP. So if you've got a DevOps department, if you have done a lot of research and that's your intellectual property, you're a target. If you're a university, you're a target. A lot has been said about the Internet of Things. It's the weakest link, I think, now, because it doesn't matter about your barriers anymore. If someone can bring a fridge in or a kettle in and it's got wireless connectivity. I mean, there was a case about a fishing bowl at one stage. They also talk about the percentage increase after the Australian mandatory disclosure. That number was 712% increase in disclosure. That's coming to the Privacy Commissioner's Office in 2020. I'm really pleased to also report or state or read that actually the NCSC have stated that the amount of self-reported incident breaches is on the rise. What that tells me is that actually a year down the track from this event last year, we have better people, we have better processes, right? And we have better technology to look for these breaches. And we are not perfect, but we're getting better. I'm always optimistic, so that's kind of my point of view. I also bring up CERT New Zealand, and I'll always read their latest report, and this is what they're saying. It is no surprise to anyone in this room that the #1 attack vector in New Zealand is still phishing and credential theft. It only grew by 27%. That's a nice growth number. But unfortunately, there's nothing nice about it. Look, it's also interesting to see that there's been a small reduction in unauthorized access. Does that mean we're better at password management? Actually, we're applying multi-factor authentication to a lot more things? I think so. Are we doing everything perfectly in that area? We're getting better, which is awesome. I also point out that the fact that network traffic, network visibility, rogue network detection are all areas of interest in their report, which will help me in later slides. The New Zealand Privacy Bill. Great to have John Duffy fly up from Wellington for this. Now, this is due to start to come into law in March 2020, a few days from now. I don't think it's law, because I think John will explain there's a few steps to go before it becomes law. He's nodding, so I'm right. It's New Zealand's version of GDPR. It's New Zealand's version of mandatory disclosure. It's only attracting a $10,000 fine. I know that if we follow what's happened internationally, if you look at what was before GDPR and called GCSX in the UK, GCSX was £500,000 fine for the public sector. What happens when this kind of law comes into play is you get a lot more breach notifications. With breaches and notifiable breaches comes the press. And I think that's the more significant thing than the $10,000 fine. If you're running a corporate organization and you've lost personal information, or if you've lost personal information and you're a government body, the brand and reputational damage is a lot, right? And so that's really, really important. Let's look into it with a little bit more detail. First of all, you must disclose that you've been breached within a set amount of time. You must allow public to query what PII information is, or what PII information you have of them. Query what PII information you have of them. Most of the people I speak to in this area don't even know where their PII information is at all. So you need discovery tools now, guys, to actually find out where it is before you can protect it. Or if you lose it, you need to know how to not lose it again. You need to allow the public to query what information and remove that information. If you don't know where that information is, you can't remove it. You must have appropriate security measures. Well, that's quite vague. What is appropriate security measures? That's why I brought in Tony Anscombe. GDPR, mandatory disclosure in Australia, they're all equally a little bit vague. They will give us an idea of how that's been run overseas, and maybe that's how it'll be run here. Who knows? Which is why, we've run DLP workshops with ForcePoint, and we have SafeTicker here, and obviously ESET encryption will give you a hint about what other people around the world are doing. Sadly, we did a lot of research. We read every part of the privacy bill and watched a hell of a lot of videos. It's a lot of information. It basically boils down to the fact that if you've lost data and it's deemed to be causing serious harm, if you've protected that information with the appropriate security measures, does that mean you don't have to report that breach? Maybe John can answer. The fact is, you must act if you know you've been breached. A lot of our organizations may take a lot of time before they discovered they've been breached. And I think there was a statement there that basically said the amount of time between breach detection and being breached depends on, it will determine the amount of data you've lost or the amount of damage they've caused in your network, which is why breach detection, threat hunting is ultimately very, very important to us. Let's bring us back to the number one attack vector, phishing scams. I woke up this morning at 6:30 and the first thing I read, ACC phishing scam. What kind of sad case is going after ACC customers' credentials? They're pretty low. It's pretty low for them to do that. And when we used to talk about whether New Zealand is a target for cyber attackers, 3-4 years ago, people used to say, yeah, we're at the bottom of the world, we're a small country, we're not worth it for a cyber attack. Man, there's like some really well-paid marketing people, HTML designers, they make this stuff look good. And they're buying domains and it all looks really legitimate, right? So it's a really tough thing to protect against. I bring up New World because I was shocked when I actually went to the New World website. They actually had a link that showed me dozens and dozens of different scams that's affecting New World customers. I'm sure a lot of you have shopped in New World before. A lot of it Facebook scams. If you fly in New Zealand and you're an Airpoints customer, you would have received, I did, one of these notifications. Now, having sold cybersecurity and email security specifically for more than 20 years, I no longer believe that email security alone is the answer to these phishing attacks. I think you do need to invest in best-of-breed cybersecurity technologies. The 58 current phishing attacks that gets through Microsoft Office 365 APT tells me that they may not have the best solution, although the marketing engine says so. So for me, it doesn't matter who you choose. Get a good email security vendor, but couple it by engaging your users. Cybersecurity awareness training, simulated phishing attack. Educate them to help provide another layer of defense. Remember I talked about the network? Look at the rise in unusual, suspicious network traffic. Questions you should be asking yourself is, do you actually know everything that's on your network? How well is your firewall actually configured? Yeah, you might have paid $100,000, $200,000 for that really fancy firewall. And you paid someone to look after it as well. Are they actually doing a good job? What about Internet of Things? What about all these devices that you're buying, appliances that you're buying that are internet ready? Do you have an IT and OT network? For us, making sure you have a good network detection technology and bringing that back into a central SIEM logging location with proper orchestration and automation, coupled with good people. I met a few analysts today, and SOC analysts, man, they're awesome people. They're doing the hard yards, and we need to foster those people, encourage more of them to come through our universities. The human element. I'm sure ASICs thought that it was secure. I'm sure wherever they managed their network from, when the main TV on their front store in Queen Street was hacked and 2 hours of porn was played on our high street, it wasn't so funny, to be honest. I wasn't on Queen Street at the time, Cohen. Thanks, mate. I'm going to bring up PAXN. PAXN is the APAC body that looks at cybersecurity threats APAC-wide. 36% of all global cybersecurity events happen in Asia-Pacific. We take 1.7 times longer than the global average for breach detection. Unfortunately, in APAC, it went from 417 days to 1,088 days. I have no idea what the 2019 number is. I haven't read it yet. I think we're actually doing better than our neighbors because NCSC said so. Don't forget, the New Zealand privacy bill is mandatory breach detection. I kind of stole my thunder. How quickly will you detect a breach limits the amount of data you've lost or the amount of damage that's been caused. Mean time to detection and mean time to response is one of the earliest lessons I learned from some of the presentations that I picked up from Logarithm. For Chilisoft, the red is actually the most important thing. People, SOC analysts, risk compliance officers, incident responders, we want more. We need our universities to be churning out these students because I get asked all the time, I'm building a SOC, do you know anybody? We need to bring them in young. We need to make them into people that can help our cybersecurity defense. And if you're going to run a SOC or a SNOC or a NOC, you've got to have a set of tools. Vulnerability management, we do Tripwire, ESET EDR, extra hop NDR, all brought together with an effective SIEM like Logarithm. But most importantly, orchestration and automation to remove all the tier 1 incidents, because you don't want to flood them. One of the speakers today will actually be talking about, SOC analyst fatigue. We've got to look after these people. Now, who better than this list of guys, which I'll introduce to you later on, to talk about that particular aspect. The human element. As I mentioned, the largest security show in the world is RSA. In San Francisco today, they're talking about the human element. My slides will be available for everyone, so it will be PDF'd and maybe a few things taken out, but it will be available for everyone. Now, let's workflow some of these points. Phishing attacks, more often than not, lead to credential theft. When that user has been compromised, that user's behavior changes. It's not actually that user, it's the perpetrator. That user pattern changes and they go from a victim to an attacker in your network. The term user behavioral analytics is now very, very popular in all cybersecurity. Last year was AI, this year is user behavior analytics. That's why I love my industry. There's always something new to talk about. I'm not boring, which is great. The user cases are insider threat. It's data exfiltration. Cowan spoke a little bit last year around the fact that the low and slow to creep in data exfiltration is what he was most concerned with his concentric circles. Compromised users. We've got to see that our users may not all be bad. Actually, our users need to be armed, enforced, educated to help in cybersecurity. You know, less conflict between the CISO, IT security manager, and the security policies and the users that need to use compute to do their everyday thing. Why don't we get them to help us do self-policing? So we have, again, a great panel to talk about this. And my last slide, which I think is ultimately very important, is the fact that we continue losing confidential information, PII information, via e-commerce and web applications. What's going on? Ministry of Culture and Heritage losing 300 personal documents is not good. I've got company X. It's actually a New Zealand retail organization that will breach for a month. Now you go, a month? What do they do for a month while they're in there? You're talking e-commerce server, credit card transactions. If I name that company, you'll go, yep, I shop there. I shop there on Saturday. They had everything. They had Cloudflare for WAF. They had Qualys for vulnerability management. They had Alien Vault for SIEM. But yet, what went wrong? Bad implementation, bad processes, not enough resources to make use of that data. Plus, technology that isn't using modern techniques. Radware talks about using positive security. That's the ability, funny enough, to use AI and machine learning to create signatures on the fly. Simple as that, right? That analyst in that organization, that poor guy was one guy, and he had to look after the firewalls and the antivirus and everything. And there was no orchestration and automation, nothing to help him. All he had was a whole bunch of logs and some analytics trying to figure out what the hell happened. No wonder they didn't detect that breach for a month. So, that's a little bit from me. Thank you very much. It's kind of what I do. Thank you very much.